Chapter 1. Whispers in the Briarwood. The villagers of Firthmere never ventured near the Briarwood after dusk. Children were warned with tales of thorn beasts and shadow spirits. Men spoke in low voices of lights that danced between the trees, voices like silk and bones found braided with ivy. But Elen had never feared the forest, not even in the gloaming, when the sun died slowly behind the hills and the woods sighed with wind. She was the Flamekeeper, after all. Her hut sat on the very edge of the tree line, its hearth always lit. The villagers believed the fire she kept was sacred, passed down from the Temple of the Sun, never extinguished, never cold. It was not just for warmth or cooking, it was a symbol of endurance, of hope. In a world that had grown dark since the last war, Elen watched over it day and night. But that night, the flame pulsed strangely, flickering, tall and blue. She had been tending it when the first whisper came. Come. It was not a voice she heard so much as felt, like the brush of cool fingers at the nape of her neck. She turned, but no one was there. The second time, it drifted through the air like smoke. Come to me. The flame leapt high and bright, then stilled. Elen stood, clutching her shawl close, and stepped to the open doorway. The wind had stilled. The night was unnaturally quiet. She should have ignored it. She should have stayed by the fire. But something inside her stirred, an ache, not of fear but recognition, as if something long lost was calling her home. She took a lantern, though she did not light it. The moon above was a sliver, enough to cast silver outlines on the forest path. The trees of the Briarwood were ancient, their twisted trunks tangled with vines that pulsed faintly with their own inner glow. Foxfire, the old ones called it. The forest was not silent now. Leaves rustled with unseen movements. Distant bird calls echoed unnaturally, high and soft, like flutes made of bone. Elen stepped carefully, pushing through underbrush that tugged at her skirts, catching like fingers pleading to hold her back. Still, she walked on. The whisper grew stronger, closer. Elen. She stopped dead in her tracks, her name. This time it was no feeling, it was spoken aloud. Who's there? She demanded, heart pounding. Silence answered, but it was thick, heavy, like a curtain waiting to fall. Then, just ahead, the path opened into a clearing ringed with white thorns that shimmered in the moonlight. And at the center, a briar, towering and dark as iron, its tendrils woven into a cage. Within it, motionless, lay a man. Elen approached slowly. The thorns curled like serpents, their tips quivering as she drew near. They parted for her, not with menace, but reverence. She reached the heart of the cage and dropped to her knees. The man was pale beneath layers of grime and moss, clothed in a tattered tunic that had once been fine. Vines curled around his limbs like shackles. His hair was black as raven feathers tangled, but his face was striking. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, lips slightly parted as though mid-breath. Elen touched his brow. He was warm, and beneath her fingertips, his eyelids fluttered. "Who are you?" she whispered. His eyes opened slowly, violet, like twilight before storm. "I am Cerwyn," he said, voice hoarse with sleep. "You came. You heard me." "I don't understand," Elen breathed. "You were calling me?" "I've been calling," he said, "for 100 years, and finally someone with fire in her soul answered." The vines shifted, tightening. He gasped. Elen recoiled in alarm. "They feed on time," he said through gritted teeth. "I am bound to this curse. But your fire, it stirred the old magic." She looked down at her hands. The hearth flame had marked her long ago, a faint shimmer beneath her skin, barely visible, like starlight under flesh. She had thought it only a blessing, a warmth. Not this. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Cerwyn met her gaze, something like sorrow trembling in his. Not want. Hope. And as the words fell between them, the thorns around him bloomed, one by one, into ghost-white roses. Chapter 2. The Man Beneath the Thorn. The roses that bloomed around Cerwyn were silent things, ghostly, scentless, and pale as frost. Each petal shimmered faintly in the moonlight, but none dared fall. The air was thick with stillness, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Elen knelt beside him, hand resting above the earth. The thorns had coiled tighter around his limbs again, slow and deliberate, as if warning her not to go further. Yet her presence, her very breath, kept them from striking. "You said 100 years?" she asked softly. Cerwyn nodded, his face a canvas of pain and long-held sorrow. "Give or take, time folds strangely here. The Briarwood is cursed, not just by magic, but by memory." Elen studied the thorns. No ordinary vine had that kind of sentience. "What kind of curse is this? Who did this to you?" He hesitated. "A woman once called me king." His eyes turned away as though to shield her from the weight of that answer. "A lover?" Elen asked before she could stop herself. Cerwyn gave a dry, bitter chuckle. "A sister, queen by blood." But she desired more. When I refused her war, she sought power through older paths. Paths better left buried. The forest rustled in agreement, as if it remembered too. "She bound me in this cage of thorns," he continued. "One of sacrifice, a life sealed in slumber, with only a single chance of release." Elen's voice lowered. "And what is that chance?" "You." She rose slowly to her feet, heat rising in her cheeks. "I don't even know you." "You don't have to," he said, "but the fire you keep is not just flame, it's soul fire. It marks you as a bearer of the ancient spark, the kind that can sever living spells, or awaken what sleeps inside them. The flame, her flame. Passed down from her grandmother, and her grandmother before that. Always protected, never explained." "Why me?" she whispered more to herself than to him. "Because you heard me when no one else could." She looked into his eyes again. Violet, yes, but rimmed with something old and aching. Not pleading, not desperate. Just waiting. A long silence passed between them before Elen reached into her satchel and pulled out the small brass vial she always carried. Inside it, a flicker of her hearth's flame danced, eternal and eager. The cage shivered. "Are you sure?" she asked him, voice trembling. "No," Cerwyn said, "but I've had 100 years to wonder what the world still holds. Let me find out." Elen uncorked the vial. A single thread of fire rose, coiling gently into the air, like incense. It drifted toward Cerwyn's chest and touched his skin, then vanished inside him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he screamed. The vines recoiled in an instant, as if burned. White roses blackened and crumbled into ash. The ground shuddered beneath her feet, and Cerwyn's body arched, limbs shaking violently. Elen rushed forward and caught his shoulders. "Breathe! You have to breathe!" He did, at first, in gasps, then in long, ragged pulls. His eyes fluttered, not just open, but awake. The skin around the thorns on his wrists began to heal, slowly, the wounds knitting together as though time itself had reversed. The cage was breaking, and yet the thorns did not all vanish. One vine still curled tightly around his left ankle, dark, veined with crimson, pulsing faintly like a heart. "I can't move," Cerwyn said. "You're still bound." "Yes," he groaned. "The curse." Half broken, half breathing. Elen looked at the spot where the final vine clung. "Can I cut it?" "No," he said quickly. "It's not a thing you sever with blades. That one is tied to the vow I made before I was bound. A vow to protect the realm, even in silence. It's blood magic." She bit her lip. "And how do we break it?" There's a place, he whispered. My kingdom, if any of it still stands. Beneath the ash and ruin, there is a well of undoing, a place where vows can be rewritten. He looked up at her. But I can't get there alone. Elen stood, her fingers closing around the brass vial, now empty. The fire inside her chest still burned, but it felt different now, warmer, fuller, deeper than it ever had before. As though part of her had fused with him in that act. You won't be alone, she said. And though the Briarwood loomed dark and wild around them, something deeper stirred in the air. Something ancient. The kind of magic that moved not with fear, but with love yet born. Chapter 3. A Pact of Flame. The path out of the clearing twisted like a serpent through the briarwood, branches leaning in as if to listen. Elen walked ahead, her lantern finely lit now that the woods allowed it. Behind her, Cerwyn limped with effort, one arm around her shoulders, the other gripping a fallen branch as a makeshift cane. The vine still clung to his ankle, pulsing faintly with a life of its own. His last tether to the curse. They did not speak much at first. The night was heavy, with unseen eyes, and Cerwyn's strength was slow to return. But Elen could feel something changing. Wherever her feet touched the earth, thorns drew back. Where her lantern glowed, mist fled. The flame she had carried for years now felt more than symbolic. It was a living force, one that answered to her will. Why didn't anyone else ever hear your voice? She asked softly, when the trees thinned enough to reveal the starlit sky. They did, Cerwyn replied. But not in the way that mattered. Dreamers, wanderers, many passed by this cage. Some tried to free me, others tried to end me. He winced at the memory. But the forest guards its secrets. Only fire could loosen its grip. Elen thought of the stories her grandmother used to tell her, of the old gods of root and ash, and the flame that came not from the sky, but from within. The soul fire, she murmured. Yes, Cerwyn said. You carry it. You are it, in some way. And that's why the pact must be made now, before we reach the ruins. She stopped walking. What pact? He leaned against a tree, breathing deeply. To break the binding thorn, you must share your fire fully. Not just a spark, but your essence. She felt her chest tighten. You mean, I give you my life? No, he said quickly. Not death. It's not a sacrifice like that. It's union, a binding of spirit to spirit. The flame in you will recognize what remains in me. It will entwine us. And if the bond is true, we'll survive the undoing. And if it isn't? Then we'll burn, he said quietly. Together. The fire in Elen's lantern flickered. She looked at him, really looked at him. Cerwyn, the man beneath the thorn with a voice like an autumn wind and eyes that saw more than she could speak. He had known centuries of silence, pain, betrayal, yet he still stood, still hoped. Why would you trust me? She asked. You don't know me. He stepped closer. I know the way you looked at me when I woke, as though you remembered me, as though some part of you had waited too. Her throat tightened. The night held still, watching. Tell me how, she said. Cerwyn reached out slowly, his palm up. Give me your hand. She placed hers in his. His other hand touched her chest, above her heart, the place where the flame lived. You must speak it, he said, not with words from the tongue, but with the truth of your soul. Let it rise. At first, nothing happened, but then, warmth, gentle at first, like sunlight on her skin, then deeper, rising through her blood. Her breath caught. Images flooded her mind, her grandmother's hands lighting the hearth, her lonely nights listening to the wind, her secret dreams of a love that would feel like destiny. And then, him. Not just Cerwyn, as he stood now, but visions of him in another time. Laughing in a marble hall, standing beside a tree that bloomed with fire, holding her hand, though she looked different. Older lives. echoes of something not yet remembered. The flame erupted between their joined palms, not burning, but bonding. It wrapped around them in a spiral of gold and crimson, weaving their breath, their memory, their essence into a single cord. Elen gasped, tears slipping down her cheeks. Cerwyn held her steady. When the light faded, they stood breathless. The vine around his ankle loosened slightly, not enough to fall away, but enough to know that the bond had formed. He looked at her, reverent. "You made the pact." Elen nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "So did you." They leaned into each other, their foreheads touching as the Briarwood sighed around them like a great, ancient beast, settling back into sleep. For the first time in 100 years, the path ahead opened. Chapter 4. The Bloom of Secrets. The path that opened after the pact led not through bramble or shadow, but through something stranger, a garden untouched by time. Elen stepped cautiously into it, lantern lowered, its flame now soft and steady. Cerwyn followed her silently, the thorn still circling his ankle like a reluctant leash, but no longer resisting her presence. The trees gave way to flowering vines and marble statues draped in moss. It was a place out of a forgotten dream. "This was once the outer court," Cerwyn said quietly, brushing his fingers against a ruined column. "The Queen's garden, my sister's pride." The roses here were red as blood, blooming thick upon trellises of crumbling white stone. They filled the air with scent so rich it was almost dizzying. She loved beauty above all, he added, but hated anything that withered. When the first gray appeared in her hair, she turned to the old magic. She said if the world refused to remain perfect, she would force it to. Elen turned to him. "What happened to her?" He was silent for a moment. "She made a bargain. The Witch of Hollow Root offered her a spell to seal her kingdom in eternal bloom. But it required a sacrifice. Something living, something beloved. And she chose you?" He nodded. "I was her brother, but also her twin flame. Born of the same star, they said. The closer our souls, the more powerful the binding." Ellen's heart clenched. She gave up her own blood. For flowers? Cerwyn looked away. For immortality. A breeze stirred, carrying a sound that did not belong, singing, soft, distant, and sorrowful. Elen turned toward the sound and found her steps drawn deeper into the garden. They passed under archways of blooming white wisteria, the petals falling like snow. Statues of forgotten gods lined the path, some faceless, others broken at the base. One bore a startling resemblance to Cerwyn himself, hands open as though in surrender. At the center of the garden stood a pool of mirrored water. Above it, a tree unlike any Elen had ever seen, its bark silvered, its leaves a brilliant blue-green, and its roots wound into the water like veins. "This is where the spell was cast," Cerwyn murmured. "The bloom of secrets, the place where truth rises unbidden. The waters show not what you seek, but what you carry." Elen knelt beside the pool, the surface perfectly still. Her reflection stared back, tired eyes, wild hair, the faint glow of fire still whispering beneath her skin. Then it changed. She saw herself as a child, sitting beside her grandmother's hearth, her small hands reaching out to touch the dancing flame. Her grandmother's voice, "You are a torchbearer, Elen. One day, your fire will awaken what was meant to sleep." The image rippled, and her reflection blurred. She now stood beside Cerwyn, not as she was, but in a different life. Her hair was braided with silver thread, her clothes spun from sunlit linen. She smiled, radiant, as he kissed her hand. And then, war. The sky broke. A woman with a crown of thorns screamed from a balcony. The two were torn apart, the flame between them extinguished in darkness. The vision shattered. Elen reeled back from the pool, heart pounding. "What did you see?" Cerwyn asked. "Us," she said slowly. "In another life, together, torn apart." He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. I've seen glimpses, dreams while I slept. Your face, always changing, but always you. How is that possible? She whispered. How could we have lived before? Some loves are older than time, he said. Not all stories are linear. Ours loops like a flame, flickering, dying, then rising again. She looked at him, and despite everything, the curse, the thorns, the ancient witch waiting in hollow root, her fear was gone. She took his hand. I don't know how this ends, she said, but I'm not running from it. The ground trembled. The water in the pool boiled. The tree above it cracked down the middle, and from its split trunk a voice hissed like smoke. The flame has remembered. The pact is made. The witch knows. Kerwin's grip tightened on hers. We don't have much time, he said. She'll try to stop us before we reach the kingdom below ash. Ellen looked at the broken tree, its sap glowing like fire in the dark. Let her come, she said. This time I'll burn back. Chapter 5. The Kingdom Below. Ash. They crossed the threshold just after dawn. The Briarwood ended not with trees, but with silence. As Ellen and Kerwin stepped from its last twisted roots, the land opened before them into a valley of ruin. Ash coated the earth like snowfall, and what once must have been a great capital now lay in scorched fragments. Walls crumbled, towers cracked, statues blackened beyond recognition. The very air tasted of forgotten grief. This was your kingdom? Ellen whispered. Kerwin stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Yes, Eldrath, the flame-crowned city. She could still see the bones of its glory, grand avenues split by time, and domes now caved in but echoing past elegance. At the heart of it all, a palace loomed in shadow. Its spires bent like withered branches, yet one light glowed faintly in its highest chamber. Steady, defiant. Someone's there, she said. He nodded. She never left. My sister. She wove her spirit into the land. She is the ash, the whisper, the cold. A crow called overhead, only one, and its shadow stretched long as it circled above the ruin. They moved slowly through the remnants of Eldrath. Every stone seemed to sigh beneath their steps. Once golden banners now rotted in the wind. Vines coiled through the bones of long-dead soldiers, their rusted weapons still clenched. She was loved, Kerwin said almost to himself. Before the greed took root, she was fierce and bright and wanted to protect everything. Power changes people, Ellen replied, or reveals them. They reached the palace steps. Each one bore carved runes, dulled by time, but still warm to the touch. Ellen paused, brushing her fingers over them. Her flame pulsed in her chest, reacting not to danger, but recognition. She wrote these, Kerwin said, when she bound me. They are words of intention. To break them, we must overwrite them. He knelt and drew a dagger from within the folds of his tattered cloak, a ritual blade etched in gold. Its hilt shimmered faintly as though remembering sunlight. Ellen took it without question. Blood? She asked. Yes, he said. Yours. She didn't hesitate. A small cut across her palm, and the flame responded instantly. No pain, only warmth. She pressed her hand to the first rune. The stone drank her blood and glowed, the old inscription dissolving into flame. She moved up each step, repeating the act until every rune was rewritten. At the top, the palace doors creaked open. Inside, darkness lived. No torches lined the walls. No servant's footsteps echoed. The grand hall was cavernous, empty, and colder than any night Ellen had known. The ceiling arched like a cathedral, but the stained glass windows were cracked, their colors weeping down in shards. She's watching, Kerwin said. Let her. They followed the central corridor until it curved downward, spiraling into the heart of the palace. The stone changed as they descended, grew smoother, darker, humming with power. They reached a door carved from obsidian, sealed with living thorns. At its center pulsed a single red gem, set within a sigil shaped like a flame and crown entwined. "The door to the Well of Undoing," Cerwyn said. "This is where my oath was bound, where her curse still holds." The thorn around his ankle flared bright red. "She knows we're here," Elen said, and then laughter. It echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once, a voice wrapped in silk and venom. "My dear brother, you brought her here? The little Flamekeeper?" Cerwyn tensed. "Show yourself." The laughter ceased, and from the air itself she emerged, tall, robed in smoke and silver. Her face was beautiful but wrong, ageless and hollow, like a statue that smiled too long. Her eyes were black as ink, rimmed in burning gold. Elen stepped forward. "You're the Witch of Hollow Root." "I am the Queen of What Remains," the woman replied. "And you are nothing but a flicker, a girl pretending at fire." "Maybe," Elen said, raising her hand. The flame in her chest surged. "But a flicker can still burn you down." The witch's gaze turned to Cerwyn. "You would unmake my eternity for her?" He met her stare without flinching. "I would," the witch sneered. "Then you shall break together." She vanished in a storm of ash and wind, and the door behind her burst open. Thorn and smoke surged forth like a tide. Elen grabbed Cerwyn's hand. "No more running." Together, they stepped into the dark. Chapter 6. The Witch of Hollow Root. The chamber beyond the obsidian door was not of stone, but root. Vast, coiled tendrils twisted through the air like a cathedral of vines, arching overhead and spiraling into the earth below. The floor was slick with dew and ancient moss, and at its center rose the Well of Undoing. A black pool, still as glass, rimmed by a circle of jagged, glowing runes. The witch stood at the far end, her form shifting subtly, as though light refused to cling to her. Behind her, above the well, floated a burning crown made of woven thorns and flame, Cerwyn's true inheritance, twisted by her magic. Elen and Cerwyn stepped inside, the thorn still pulsing around his ankle, now glowing brighter than ever. "She bound the oath here," Cerwyn whispered. "My vow to protect the realm became a prison when twisted by her hand. That crown, it was my birthright." Ellen's eyes locked on the crown. It pulsed faintly in rhythm with her own heartbeat. A terrible power lived within it, power stolen, warped, and kept from the world for a century. The witch raised her hand, and the vines in the ceiling groaned, shifting. "You presume to reclaim what was never truly yours, brother?" she purred. "You abandoned your duty when you refused the war. You gave up your right to rule." "I refused to destroy innocent lives," Cerwyn growled. "You called it weakness. I call it honor." She stepped forward, her eyes falling on Elen. "And you, the little spark, do you think love is enough to undo what I've built?" Elen raised her lantern. The flame inside burned white hot. "Not just love," she said. "Truth and fire." The witch sneered. "Then burn." With a scream that cracked the chamber's root-bound walls, she flung her arms wide. Vines shot forth like serpents, teeth bared, aimed for Ellen's heart, but Elen stood still. The fire leapt from her chest, not wild, not panicked, but resolute. It met the thorns mid-air, consuming them in a blaze of gold. The witch recoiled with a snarl. "You have his soul," she hissed. "You tied yourself to him." Elen nodded, stepping forward. "We made the pact. What you twisted, we'll undo." "You don't have the strength," the witch spat. Cerwyn stepped beside her. "Then we'll borrow it from every life you stole, every year I slept, every soul this flame has remembered." The thorn on his ankle unraveled, falling to the floor like a dead snake. The runes around the well flared to life. The witch shrieked and raised her hands, summoning wind and ash. The chamber trembled. The well boiled. The crown screamed with light. Elen stepped to the edge of the well and held out her hand. "Flamekeeper's vow," she said, voice shaking but clear. "By fire and blood, I unbind this oath." She took the dagger from Cerwyn's belt and slit her palm again. This time she let the blood fall into the well. The water turned gold. Cerwyn stepped beside her. "By right of flame-born blood," he said, "I reclaim my soul." He placed his hand over hers. The water flared. The witch screamed and lunged, but the flame surged up from the well, engulfing her midair. Her form twisted, turned to smoke and ash, her cry echoing in the roots like the howling of a storm. The crown above them began to fall. Elen reached for it without thinking. The moment her fingers touched the woven flame, it broke apart, splintering into thousands of golden embers that fell like stars around them. When the light cleared, the witch was gone. The chamber was still. The well darkened once more, its surface smooth and quiet. Elen and Cerwyn stood breathless, hands still clasped, their blood mingled over the runes. "It's done," he whispered. She nodded, her voice thick. "We broke the curse." But something was wrong. The flame inside her began to flicker, her vision swimming. Cerwyn caught her. "Elen." She smiled weakly. "It's all right. I gave it. I gave what was needed." "No," he said, holding her tighter. "Not like this." "I saw it," she whispered. "In the flame, we rise again." Her body shuddered once, then stilled. The chamber dimmed. And then, just as Cerwyn fell to his knees, the flame burst from her chest in a radiant pulse, rising, swirling, transforming. Her body glowed, lifted by light, and in its place stood a figure, familiar but different. Her eyes opened, not gold, not fire, but starlight. "I'm not gone," she said. "I've become." Chapter 7. The Choice of Thorns. The chamber pulsed with silence. Elen hovered just above the stone floor, her feet barely brushing the moss-covered ground. The golden light that had burst from her chest had faded, but its essence still shimmered in her skin. Her hair floated, as though stirred by a soft wind, and her eyes, once ember-bright, now held the pale, infinite glow of stars, reflected in midnight water. Cerwyn knelt, his hand still outstretched toward the place where she had collapsed moments earlier. "Elen?" His voice broke around her name. "I'm here," she said, descending slowly, "but not as I was." He stood shakily. "What happened to you?" "The fire knew what was needed," she replied, her voice softer, now, layered with an echo not entirely her own. "To break the curse, I had to become more than its keeper. I had to become the flame." Cerwyn reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing her arm. Warmth, living vibrant, met his touch. "I feared I lost you." "You did not lose me," she said, "but I chose this. The well demanded transformation. It offered me a path, and I walked it." He held her close then, wrapping her in an embrace he thought he might never have again. She rested her head against his chest, and for the first time in 100 years, the palace was still. No whispers, no thorns, no curse. But peace, as always, is never given freely. From behind them, the runes at the well's edge flared once more. A low groan rumbled through the roots above, and a single vine slithered out from a crack in the wall, black, dry, and hissing like a snake. Cerwyn turned sharply. "What is that?" Elen moved between him and the well, the last echo of her will. The vine lashed forward, but Elen raised her hand. The flame within her flared to life, and the vine recoiled, but did not retreat. "She left a seed," Elen whispered. "In the spell. A condition." "What condition?" Cerwyn asked. "That one of us must remain here, to bind the well, to keep the magic from growing wild again. If we both leave, the curse resets." Cerwyn's eyes darkened. "She bound us even in defeat." She feared the fire might outgrow her, And she was right. Elen walked slowly toward the well, the flames at her fingertips dancing with each step. If I stay, the land will heal. Slowly, the kingdom will regrow. The root will sleep. And if I stay? He asked. She turned to him. Then I wither. The fire is part of me now. It cannot survive here long without feeding. A silence passed between them, thick and final. He stepped forward. Then I'll stay. No. Her voice held gentle steel. You've already lost 100 years. You must live again. See the world. Walk beneath skies that are not cursed. But not without you, he said. I will not leave you behind. She cupped his face in her hands. You won't. I'll be here, yes, but not gone. The flame is of all things now. It will find you in every hearth, every sunrise, every kiss warmed by breath. His eyes burned with tears. It isn't enough. It never is, she said softly. But love endures, even when it cannot remain. He held her close one last time, and she kissed him, tender, slow, and final. A promise not of endings, but continuance. Then she stepped back and raised both hands. The well roared to life, the vines retreating in fear. The crown of thorns had crumbled, and in its place bloomed a circle of light. I name you king again, Caerwyn of Eldrath, she said, her voice echoing in the chamber. Go into the world. Rebuild. Remember. The light surrounded her like a cloak. Her form shimmered, part flame, part flesh, part something else entirely. He took a single step back. The runes glowed blue, then gold. The root-bound chamber breathed a final time and fell still. And Elen, bearer of the flame, guardian of the well, smiled. I will wait for you, she said, even if you never return. Caerwyn turned and walked from the chamber, his back straight, his heart full, and aflame. Chapter 8. The Everkindled Flame. The palace of Eldrath no longer whispered. By the time Caerwyn emerged from its depths, the air above the valley had begun to change. Clouds scattered. The first true sunlight in a century spilled down over the scorched stones, gilding ruin with the golden promise of renewal. The ash that blanketed the ground stirred. Beneath it, stubborn shoots of green poked through, trembling with life. He stood on the broken balcony that once overlooked his kingdom. Where once there had been cheers and the sound of festival bells, now only the quiet hum of beginning again. Yet it was enough. In the weeks that followed, word spread. A stranger had returned to the edge of the world, bearing a crown of firelight and eyes that remembered grief. He did not claim to be a king, though people called him so. He walked among the ruins with bare hands, clearing stones, building shelters, planting seeds. Farmers came, then masons, then wandering priests and scholars hungry to reclaim what was lost. Hope took root in the dust. Still, every evening, Caerwyn returned to the threshold of the Briarwood. The forest had changed. No longer a snarling mass of thorns, it grew tall and wild with strange new beauty, its trees humming faintly when the wind passed through. Fireflies danced at its edge like lanterns guiding souls, and the vines no longer reached to trap, but to shelter. He knew she was watching. He felt her presence in the flames of every hearth, in the warmth of sun on his skin. She had not vanished. She had become something larger. But the ache remained. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, a young girl from the valley approached him. She carried a bundle of kindling and a small brass lantern. Her eyes were curious. "Are you the man who talks to the forest?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Only when it's listening." She opened the lantern. Inside was a single golden flame, flickering gently. "A woman gave this to my mother," she said. "Long ago, when the village was still hidden, she said to pass it on when the world felt warm again." Caerwyn's breath caught. The flame rose slightly as if recognizing him. She said, "Give it to the one who waits. the girl added, eyes wide. He knelt, hands trembling, and took the lantern. The moment it touched his skin, a vision bloomed behind his eyes. Elen, standing in the root-bound chamber, her form glowing brighter than ever. She raised her hand and released the spark. It flew through root and soil, through shadow and stone, into the world. A promise made. A bond kept. He opened the lantern and let the flame rest on his palm. It did not burn. Instead, it pulsed. Once, twice, 3 times, like a heartbeat. He whispered her name, and the flame whispered back. From that day forward, Cerwyn was no longer just a ruler. He became a keeper, a watcher of fire, a builder of bridges between what was and what would be. Eldrath bloomed again, slowly, painfully, gloriously. Towers rose, songs returned, the people kindled new lives beneath banners of woven light. And in every home, a small brass lantern glowed, passed hand to hand, generation to generation. They called it the Everkindled Flame. They called it her. Cerwyn never loved another. He walked the forest edge each day, spoke her name into the wind, and found her in every warmth that touched his skin. And when at last his time came, when his breath grew soft and the world tilted gently away from him, he lit one final lantern with the flame he had guarded all his days. He placed it at the threshold of the Briarwood, and the trees parted. Elen stood waiting, radiant and whole. Not as fire, not as goddess, but as herself, woman, lover, flamekeeper, eternal. She held out her hand, and together they walked into the forest. The trees closed behind them, but the light remained.